Good morning, and welcome back to Botany. Today we are going to talk about sweet, sweet sugar. Yesterday we were talking about the way in which the vascular system does transport things through that stem, through the leaves, through the nodes and the branches, and it's going to go from one place to the next. Kind of like the fingers and the arms of people. We kind of have these branching things as well. Our torso branches out into those two arms, which branches out into five fingers usually, sometimes not. Um, Now, let's take a look at sugar. Sugar is the basic building block for all life on Earth. And you're like, oh, but Mr. Fox, yesterday you were talking about wolves, and wolves don't eat sugar. Well, they don't. They eat animals. But those animals need to eat something, and if those animals didn't eat something, the wolves wouldn't have any food. So, yes, actually, the wolves need sugar as part of their diet because they rely on the sugar that those other animals eat. That cute little bunny that's out there eating yummy, sugary grasses and stems and leaves is collecting sugar and turning it into proteins and fats inside of its body. And the wolf wants to eat those proteins and fats. So it's going to grab one of those bunnies, usually the sickest bunny or the oldest bunny or the bunny that needs getting that's actually going to destroy somebody's garden unnecessarily, destroy nature if the wolves don't keep those things in check. So a lot of times we think that's sad, or we look at those things, we're like, no, no, don't eat them. But yeah, it's pretty important that they do eat them and that we stay in harmony and balance. Um, so the harmony and balance of these plants, wow, wow. We talked about the very basics at the beginning of our botany block, how plants are basically just sun and earth and wind, these elements all put together. And we're going to look at one of these major elements today. Plants have this green pigment in them, and this green pigment is called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is inside the cell walls of these plants, and it's the thing that allows them to absorb sunshine. It actually like eats sunshine. That's what plants eat. They eat sunshine, they drink water, they breathe in some air. We'll talk in the next few days about how they breathe in air and what types of things they're going to breathe in. But they need these things to create sugar. And these little sugars, the xylem and phloem that contain these sugars that go throughout the plant. Um, Now, how do they do this? Wherever you see the green on a plant, and it might be the stem or it might be the leaf, that's where the plant is actively taking in the sunshine and converting it. Um, and one of the cool things also is that, we were talking about, hey, sugar is this basic thing that everything needs, and humans need this sugar to survive. You're going to eat the plants, or you're possibly going to eat some animals if that's your choice. But the animals that you ate also ate the plants, so you absolutely need this to survive. We also need the air from plants to survive. And again, we are going to get into this in the next couple days. We're going to talk about how plants breathe. But the basic element of it is if they're going to breathe out oxygen rich air, which humans breathe in and animals breathe out carbon dioxide rich air, and animals breathe out this carbon dioxide rich air, which the plants breathe back in. So it is this wonderful harmonious loop. Animals need plants to survive, and plants need animals to survive. Um, so basically, wherever this plant is doing this act of taking in sunlight, which is called photosynthesis, they're going to photosynthesize inside of their tissues. Now, some plants don't really have leaves, so they can't really do their photosynthesis um, in their leaves. You look at places where it's really dry, hey, like right where we are in California, it's an incredibly dry area. And if a plant had a whole lot of leaves and it was in the desert, not like nice and in the city and well watered like our homes and yards and gardens, but like when you travel out and you hike a little bit and you go into the desert and you look there, you're like, what types of plants are there? They have thicker, woodier leaves, and some plants have no leaves whatsoever. Those cacti, and you're like, oh, what about the sharp little spikes that come off of there? Well, those little needles, they're not exactly leaves. They are not going to photosynthesize. So how the cactus does it is the cactus just does it right in its stem, its giant green stem, which is why those cacti are green. So this green pigment, this chlorophyll that's inside the plant tissues, is basically going to gobble up sunlight, mix it with water from the roots, and mix it with carbon dioxide, and it's going to create sugars, this sugary sweet sap. And then it's going to store those sugars in the form of starches or proteins or fats inside of the plant somewhere, in the leaves, in the stem, in the tissues, in the cells, in the roots, in the tubers, whatever, wherever it's storing this stuff. And this is what animals and people have learned to eat, because that's how we get it, because we don't know how to photosynthesize yet. As humans, as animals, we don't really know how to photosynthesize. Only plants can do it. And other things like algae and some bacteria can also photosynthesize. But for the most part, it's us. It's us that rely on plants, and it's plants that do this activity that help to create these building blocks of life. And another thing is, it's not just, we look at these leafy plants. It's not just, oh, these leaves, they're breathing out and giving us all the air. A pretty significant amount comes from ocean life and aquatic life. You have all this algae on the top of the water. You have all these seaweeds. You actually have a whole lot of oxygen being created by plants that are in the sea. So, if we think to ourselves, we're like, oh yeah, humans, we live on land. We're only responsible for the things on land. All the ocean stuff can kind of just figure itself out. Well, that's not necessarily true. Our human activities do really disturb quite a few things that are in the sea, in the ocean, in the lakes, in the rivers. It's more than just like boats and jet skis and stuff like that we're disrupting nature with. But it's significantly more than that. The way that we fish has to be very careful. Fishing boats don't always just use fishing lines. In fact, most commercial fishing boats, which are the fishing boats that fish for the fish that you find in stores, do not use fishing lines at all. They use giant nets and just kind of catch everything. Or, worst case scenario, there's something called trawling, where they trawl huge nets with weights on them and scrape them along the ocean floor and just dig up everything that's there, from coral to the plants, the algae that's down there. All these things are just getting destroyed by these trawling boats. But what they do is then they haul up that net, and they just have thousands and thousands of pounds of fish. And then they can sell that fish pretty cheap because they fished the easy way, the cheap and easy way. Now, what can we do about it as humans? Well, we can don't go the cheap and easy way. If you see a cheap fish at the store, you can ask. You say, hey, how was this fish fished? How did they catch this fish? If you're at a restaurant, and you're going to order some fish, you say, hey, how did they get this fish? As humans, what we can do is we can always at least ask questions. Now, a pretty common answer is that a person will say, I don't know. And maybe they will look into it. But you can find ecologically sound choices. You can always, some fish are even advertised, some things that you find at the store, these things will advertise that they really don't hurt plants as much. And they say, hey, sustainably farmed or sustainably wild caught. And those are the types of choices that I make because I really want to respect all these plants that are out there. So, yes, things underwater can photosynthesize. Things that are above water can photosynthesize. We absolutely need these sugars because they're the basic unit of all of this life that is plants and animals and humans. We need that sugar. Now, interestingly, you can even take a supplement for your own body called chlorophyll. Don't take any supplements unless you talk to a doctor. That's what they tell you. That's the legal advice that you have to say. My dad, who's a specialist doctor who works with some people, if you have mold toxicity, chlorophyll is sometimes the best thing that you can take. But if you take the chlorophyll, you need to figure out what dose to take the chlorophyll. You can actually seriously injure yourself if you have this mold toxicity and you take too much chlorophyll at once. You can really damage your body because you don't want to release these mold toxins too quickly from your body to get rid of those things. So we can use these wonderful plants, and in fact these chloroplasts, this chlorophyll that you find inside the plants that create the photosynthesis, we can use those to heal the human body as well. How does it work? Well, we'll chat about that more in 7th and 8th grade when we study humans and the human body. But for now, these are the things that help the plants create the sugar that helps create all those living tissues that you see inside the plant. It's a pretty essential process. Um, and as you look out at plants, get out there and look out at plants, and you think, huh, why are leaves so skinny? Because a lot of leaves are really thin, right? And partly they're broad and thin because they want to collect as much sunlight as possible. And if plants just had basically like spheres, like an orange or something like that, it's not a very good method of collecting sunlight, you know? It's a good method of storing things inside that orange. They can store sugars, which they do inside that orange, but it's not a very good method for collecting sunlight. So a lot of these plant leaves are very flat and broad and thick and wide and long. And we'll study these leaves much further in detail over the next couple days. But when you look at them, just be aware, yes, this plant is trying to be efficient. Plants and most of things in nature are very efficient, and it wants to collect absolutely as much sunlight as it possibly can. It wants to just gobble up all that sunlight. And you don't do that with one big, thick, flat mass or one round orb or something like that. You know, you do this with creating lots and lots and lots of leaves. Because some people, and I'm not going to point to any of you in class because I know none of you would do this, but some people very thoughtlessly, as they go by a plant, they just pick off the leaves because it's kind of a fun thing to do as a human. You're just walking by and picking the leaves and tossing them into the wind because it was kind of a fun thing to do. Well, what you're doing is you're ripping off the plant's lungs. You're taking away good oxygenated air from humans when you do that, and you're taking away the plant's ability to create food and feed animals, which in turn feed other plants and animals and feed humans. So you're killing a little piece of the world every time you pick off leaves carelessly. If you're going to take some leaves for some careful observation, just be kind. Ask the plant first. Make sure that there's enough and that the plant doesn't only have like 1 or 2 leaves. And if it does, don't take those 1 or 2 leaves. Find a different plant that has thousands and thousands of leaves and maybe take one of those to study. And just be aware and be more mindful of not picking those leaves off of plants. All right, so today we talked about photosynthesis, and we talked about how the plants are going to use this chemical way of photosynthesizing and converting the sunlight, the earth and the air and the water and the sun into energy, which is that basic building block of life. And tomorrow we're going to talk about where does that air come from? How do the plants breathe? Because you look at the plant and you're like, oh, it breathes, but it doesn't like take a breath in. It doesn't have lungs, does it? Does it? It doesn't have a mouth, does it? Maybe it does. Let's find out more tomorrow and the next day. I hope you have a wonderful sunny day. Get out there and go look at more plants.